Hi everyone, my name's Jordan and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm doing everyone's favorite videos, and that is my top 10 books of 2022. So I recently did a complete tier ranking list of every book I read in 2022 that I will link down below, and that has kind of informed this top 10 list. I gave myself a few parameters. There is only one book per series because otherwise this would just be like all Robin Hobb and Tamsin Muir. So there's only one book per series, and I did not do one book per author because I felt like that was unfair to Robin Hobb, and you'll see why. So there are two Robin Hobb on here, but they are from different series, and that is the only rule I have for this list. It is based off my tier ranking list, which the rules for that one were no novellas that are part of a bigger series, and no nonfiction, and no graphic novels and mangas. So the same rules apply to this, because I kind of rank those and think about those differently than I do these other books. This reading year has been absolutely phenomenal. I've read so many insanely good books, like so many books that have just really stuck with me and I think about all the time. But these top 10 are ones that I will be rereading in the future and are some of my favorite books of all time, not just of 2022. So let's get into it. Coming in at number 10, my 10th favorite book of 2022 is The Hunger of the Gods by John Gwynne. This is the second book in the Bloodsworn saga, the first one being The Shadow of the Gods. The Shadow of the Gods was a book that I thought was good, but wasn't a new favorite. I had a hard time connecting with the characters, but this second book I really resonated with. I really liked it. I think that John Gwynne's prose is very unique. Just the way he writes is very unique, and the story was really great, and his characters really gripped me, and I'm very excited for what the third book will bring. I am 3 books into the Faithful and the Fallen series and really just kind of feeling about it, which was really disappointing for me because so many people love it. But I did read the Bloodsworn saga first, and this second book is phenomenal, and so I know that his writing is improving, and that gives me lots of hope that I will continue to really love this series. This series is inspired by Norse mythology. The gods are all big mythical beasts, such as the wolf, and then there's a dragon on the first cover. They are all dead at the beginning of the first book, and their bones have a lot of power. And so it's kind of this story of, there's a lot of different POVs, but there's stories of revenge, and there's stories of people being power hungry and trying to get the power from these gods' bones, and just kind of repercussions that come from that. And it's a really beautiful story about family and friendship and found family, and he just does a really good job of creating really great relationships between his characters, as well as a really fast-paced and fun plot. I also think that he does a much better job in this series of battle scenes. In Faithful and the Fallen, there's just way too much battle scenes. It's not necessary, but in these, they're really well written and they're appropriate to the story. So I really loved this book. 10th favorite book of the year. Coming in at number 9 is a book that is very unique from the rest of the books on this list, and that is Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. This, it took BookTube, took the book community by storm this year. It is a cozy fantasy book. It literally says a novel of high fantasy and low stakes. It's about this orc barbarian Viv who has decided to lay down her battle axe and retire, basically. And she wants to go to this town and open a coffee shop. And in this town, no one knows what coffee even is. So with the help of some friends that she meets, she is able to open this coffee shop and create this home for herself in this town. And it is just such a lovely, heart-touching story. It's everything you could want. It feels like a beautiful D&D side quest. Like it feels just so personal. You really grow to love these characters in such a short book, and like it says, there's not a lot of high stakes. There's not huge battles or anything. There is like a climax and there is sadness at some points, but it is still such a beautiful book of friendship and found family and love, and it's phenomenal. It is phenomenal, and I look forward to rereading this over and over whenever I need a good pick-me-up. Coming in at number 8 is one I would never have predicted to be on this list until after I read it, and even after I read it, because I read it at the beginning of the year. I was like, surely something will pass it, but I think about this book all the time, and that is The Justice of Kings by Richard Swan. This book, honestly, was such a surprise for me. I had an arc and I just read it because I had it. And I honestly was uncertain if I would even like it. I didn't really know what it was about. And I grew to absolutely love this book. I think about it a lot. And now Tyranny of Faith comes out in February, which will be the second book of the series. And I am so, so excited for it. This book is set in a world where there are these justices that go basically town to town and deal out justice. They listen to complaints. They have a few magical powers that help them kind of figure out what's gone on in these towns. And so this one justice who has two helpers is kind of like far out in the realm. He is like on the outskirts, and he's in this small town where there has been a murder, and he's trying to figure out who did it. But there's also like a bunch of religious unrest going on, and he hears that there's things going on back at the Capitol that he really should attend to, but he wants to wrap up what he's doing here. And this story, while being kind of like a fantasy murder mystery, which sounds like something I would not like, actually is so good, and the characters are phenomenal, and we kind of start small. We're in this small town, and by the end you can tell that the scope is going to get much bigger in the second book, and that is so exciting to me. Richard Swan did like a phenomenal job of really getting us comfortable in this world, teaching us this magic system, teaching us what's going on, and then being like, all right, next book, things are going off the rails. Like, you can tell that's where it's going, and I'm so excited for it. I actually just got the audiobook from my library, so I can reread this before Tyranny of Faith comes out, just so I'm fresh. I've got it all fresh in my mind because I did read this a year ago, but I do think I still remember quite a lot of this. So I'm really excited to continue on with this series as they come out. All right, coming in at number 7 is A Psalm for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers. This is a novella that is... My dog just hit my camera, so I hope it's still in focus and it's still on me. Anyway, this is a novella that is a sci-fi novella that is set in the future of Earth. And it's kind of like this utopian world where there was these artificial intelligence robots that worked with humans, but they decided one day that they wanted to live on their own and that humans were using them and they weren't getting to live their own lives. And so they kind of like separated from humans, and humans realized their errors, and there was like a treaty that was signed, and the robots went off into the forest and were never seen again. And this monk has gone out into the forest, and they're kind of like unsatisfied with their life and stuff, and they meet this robot. And together they kind of explore the forest and they discuss each other. Humans haven't seen robots in hundreds of years, so this is like the first encounter either of them are having with the other. And it's really just like a beautiful story of friendship and like what it means to be human and what it means to be happy. And it's just a beautiful, beautiful exploration. And the second book is also really good. In that one, the human takes the robot into the human territory. So there's a lot of similar themes, and it's just, they're so beautiful, and they're quick reads, and they deal with a lot of difficult themes in such a beautiful way, and I will definitely be rereading these ASAP. Coming in at number 6 was another big surprise, and that is A Light from Uncommon Stars by Rika Aoki. This is a sci-fi-ish book. It is definitely sci-fi, but it's sci-fi light. It's like urban sci-fi, I guess. It's like set on Earth, and mostly everything is the same, except there's a few sci-fi elements. And this one was a big surprise for me. I just read it because I had seen the cover and thought it was pretty, and it ended up being a favorite. This book is about a woman who is a violin prodigy, but she makes a deal with the devil that in exchange for notoriety, she will basically train 7 different pupils in the way of the violin and then convince them to sacrifice their soul to the devil. And she's on her 7th pupil. And the woman she chooses is a young, untrained trans woman who has no formal training. She just plays for herself. And she has a very tough life. She gets discriminated against a lot. And this woman is just like trying to teach her violin. They end up forming this really beautiful bond. And there's also an alien family that owns a donut shop that kind of joins this found family, and it's a really beautiful story about acceptance and identity and like what do you want to be known for. And I think it's just such a heart-touching story. It's a book that I think about all the time, and I recommend it to a lot of people, and it's really, really good. So I highly recommend this book if you haven't read it. I feel like I don't see people on BookTube talking about it a lot. I've only seen a few people mention it, and I think more people should read it because I think it is a really beautifully written book. Coming in at number 5 is Howling Dark by Christopher Ruocchio. This is the second book in the Sun Eater series. I read all of the Sun Eater series this year that was out, which is 1 through 5, and they were all absolutely phenomenal. But Howling Dark was my favorite of the 5, and that is purely because of the setting, which I'm not going to say because that will spoil the book. But this series follows a man named Hadrian Marlowe, who is the son of like a small lord on a planet, and on like a mining planet. And he is told that he has to go join the religious order, and he escapes. He does not want to do that. He starts out the story by telling you that at the end of all of this, he destroys a sun that in turn completely wipes out an alien race as well as billions of humans. So you know the story is going to end pretty dark, and he's kind of telling a story of how he got there. And the second book is where things really start to pop off. The first book is definitely like a setup to the world, a setup to the alien race, as well as who Hadrian is as a person. It's definitely a slower book, but the second one is where things really pop off and things get really dark and really gritty, and you kind of get to really realize what the stakes are. Like, you know that this is going to end in a lot of death, but you really see it in this book, and it becomes quickly apparent, and I absolutely adore this book. It's definitely like the more goth book of the 5. They all have kind of different vibes overall, and this one was definitely my favorite, and I highly recommend you read Sun Eater. Even if you are new to sci-fi, it reads like a fantasy in space. There's definitely some like sci-fi elements, obviously, there's spaceships and things like that, but it feels like it has a lot of fantasy tropes that you see. So I highly recommend this book to anyone that reads sci-fi or fantasy. Coming in at number 4 is Babel by R.F. Kuang. This book just came out towards the latter half of this year, and I just read it in November, and I read it in 2 days. I couldn't stop. I was not able to put it down. It was a phenomenal book. R.F. Kuang also wrote the Poppy War trilogy, which I liked but didn't love, mostly because none of the characters were likable, and so I didn't really feel much for them. But in this book, I loved all the characters. I think that the setting was really phenomenal. The atmosphere was great. This is a story about some children that are basically kidnapped from their home countries and taken to Britain to be translators for the Tower of Babel at Oxford, where they create these silver bars that basically have, like, they'll have a word and then a translated word, and together, like, with the etymologies of them, it'll kind of like inform what a physical object will do. So like they can make a wheel on a cart sturdier or make a bridge sturdier or whatever. So but the magic system is kind of secondary to the story. So it is a story about colonialism and imperialism and the effects it has on other nations as well as on individuals, and the different ways in which people react to those instances and those situations they're put in. And it is such a well-crafted book. I know that a lot of people don't like it. A lot of people don't like that it feels very academic. There's like footnotes and stuff. I think it really worked because of the setting. They're at Oxford, they're at school. So it really worked for me. And I loved the discussions of language and how violent translation can be, because something is missing when you translate. And R.F. Kuang does a really phenomenal job of showing that and highlighting that. There is so much to unpack in this book, and I can see myself rereading this over and over and over again just to fully grasp everything she is putting forth. And I don't know if I ever will be able to fully grasp it, but just she puts forth so much thought-provoking information and story, and it's something I think about every single day. I think about this book, and I will be rereading it as soon as possible. It's also like a stunning book to have on your shelf, and it's a thought. It makes you think. So I highly recommend this to anyone. If you're going into it for a really well-developed magic system, this is not the book for you. But if you are interested in a historical fantasy, like introspective book, I highly recommend this book. Coming in at number 3 is Mad Ship by Robin Hobb. This is the second book in the Live Ship Traders trilogy. The Live Ship Traders trilogy is absolutely phenomenal. It is a beautiful trilogy set in the realm of the Elderlings. It is the second trilogy in the set of series, and it is not following Fitz. It has a completely new host of characters. It's multi-POV. It's a new location. There are definitely ties to the Fitz story, and in later series you see more of those ties, but it is like a completely different story than the Farseer trilogy. And this trilogy was absolutely amazing. It was jaw-droppingly well written. The characters were so well developed. The finale of the series, Ship of Destiny, was one of the most satisfying conclusions to a trilogy I've ever read. But Mad Ship is my favorite of the trilogy because a lot of questions are answered and there's so much action. So this trilogy follows a bunch of families in this town called Bingtown who are large trader families. And some of these trader families have what is known as live ships. And live ships are made out of wizard wood, which basically comes to life after three successive generations of people die on the ship. And so these ships are faster, they're stronger, they're able to navigate better, and they are alive. There's this woman named Althea whose father is about to die, and he is the third in the line of generations to die on the ship, and she is expecting to inherit it. However, her father leaves it to her sister's husband instead. So Althea rebels against that, and there's a bunch of other characters. The plot is huge. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and the characters are so well developed, and I think about the series all the time. I notoriously have a pretty bad memory, so for me, if I can remember a lot of details about a book, that's how I know it was really good for me, because it stuck with me, and I can really remember like every beat of this trilogy. And I mean, obviously not every beat, but I can remember so much of this trilogy. I can remember so much of how I felt while reading it. I can remember the characters and the plot, and I just really, really loved this trilogy. It was so well written, so well thought out, and we actually did a live stream over on Alex on Tall Guy Reads channel where we did a big discussion on this trilogy as a whole. I will link that video down below. We talked about a lot of our thoughts on this trilogy and how well it was written. So go check that out. It is full of spoilers, so if you only check it out if you've read it. Coming in at number 2, another Robin Hobb, but not from Live Ship, and that is Fool's Fate by Robin Hobb. This is the third book in the Tawny Man trilogy, which is the third series in the realm of the Elderlings. This book was absolutely phenomenal. I cried my eyes out at the end of this book. So originally, this series was supposed to be the last series of the Realm of the Elderlings, and you can really tell in this book. This book was supposed to be the last thing that kind of wrapped everything up. And because of that, the emotional impact at the end is just so, it's like a gut punch. I won't get into what this series is about because it will spoil things for the first trilogy, but this is back with Fitz. So we're back with Fitz, and there's a big time jump from the end of the Farseer trilogy, and you kind of see where Fitz is now and where he goes from there. That's all I'll say because I don't want to spoil things. Robin Hobb does such a good job of taking things that happened in that first Farseer trilogy and really upping the stakes. She, like, things that happened there that were unanswered or were unresolved, she has not forgotten. So there's a lot of high stakes for Fitz in this series, and this third book of the series absolutely ripped my heart out. There was a point at the end of the first book of the trilogy, Fool's Errand, that was really sad, but I didn't cry. And so I was like, for sure I won't cry in this one. But the way the ending is written, I was just broken. Like I was bawling my eyes out, and it wasn't even as sad, I think, as the first book. It was just the way it ended was so satisfying and beautiful and bittersweet, and it was just so well written that I was not just like a few tears, I was bawling. So second best book of the year for sure, hands down. It was actually kind of hard to choose between this one and my number 1, but this Robin Hobb is one of my new favorite authors, top 3 for sure. She is phenomenal. Now, having done my 2nd through 9 top books of 2022. I'm sure many of you will guess what my number 1 book is for 2022, but if you haven't yet, it is Harrow the Ninth by Tamsin Muir. This was incredibly hard to choose from between this and Fool's Fate, and that is because the Locked Tomb series is so unique to anything I've ever read that they're incredibly hard to compare between other books. They are just so different, and I read so much fantasy and sci-fi that like it's easy to compare. It's easy to say, oh, I like these characters more, or I like this plot more, but these are just so different. They are unlike any other book I've ever read, so they're really hard to compare. But the reason I chose Harrow the Ninth is because this series has stuck with me more than any other series I read this year, and Harrow the Ninth was my favorite of the 3 that are out. It is the 2nd book in the Locked Tomb trilogy, the first one being Gideon the Ninth, then there's Harrow the Ninth, and then Nona the Ninth. All of which are in my top favorites of the year, but again, I'm only doing 1 per series. This series follows a woman named Gideon and a woman named Harrow, and they are part of the Ninth House. And Harrow is asked by basically God to come to the first house to compete to become one of his lictors, which is like one of his bodyguards almost. And she is a necromancer, and she needs a cavalier, which is basically her bodyguard. And so she takes Gideon with her, and they have a very fraught relationship. They grew up together. Harrow is the heir to the house, and Gideon is basically a prisoner. That's probably not even a very good description of the book. It's really impossible to tell you what it's about, but it is such a unique book, and the 2nd book, you have no idea what's going on. It is just so well crafted, and Tamsin Muir has been telling you from the beginning of Gideon things that are going to happen later in Harrow and in Nona, and just the forethought and the plotting and the characters, like it's all coming together. And the 4th book I think is coming out this year, which will be the final book in the series, and I'm so nervous and so excited. And yeah, I think about the series every day. I'm part of like groups that talk about it. A big part of why this series is so good for me is the fandom. There is this group of people that have all come together with fan theories and fan art and all of this stuff that really just makes this series that much more special, because you really don't know what's going on through so much of the book. And getting together with other fans of the series to talk about what you think is happening and what you think will happen has just created this community of people that is so amazing. And I have such a good time talking to people about the series. I've basically become like a door-to-door salesman for the series. I have gotten so many people to read it, like people that are not part of a book community at all, just like friends and family. I'm just like, I'm pushing it. I'm like, please read this book, please, please. And I've gotten so many people to read it and so many people to get attached to it, and I'm just gonna keep pushing. Like, everyone should read this series. I can definitely understand why it would not be for everyone, but it is so funny and so well crafted that if you just like a well crafted story, like even if you aren't totally into the humor or the characters, I think you can still appreciate the plotting of the story. So I highly recommend this to anyone that likes sci-fi fantasy, because it's kind of both. It is set in space, and it is lesbian necromancers. That's like always the tagline, is lesbian necromancers in space. But don't let that fool you. It's not a romance, and it is much bigger than that. So I highly recommend this series. One of my favorites of all time, if not my favorite of all time. Everyone should read it. Everyone should read it. And it was Harrow the Ninth was my favorite book of the year. I have an entire video of why you should read the Locked Tomb series, and I will link that down below because everyone should read it. Anyway, that is my top 10 books of the year. What a great year. Had such an amazing reading year this year. I read so many books with so many people. This was my first year on BookTube, and I'm so glad I joined. I've read so many books that I probably would never have even noticed or touched without all of the friends I've made on BookTube, including probably Robin Hobb and Christopher Accio. I probably would have never picked up their books without BookTube. So I'm forever grateful to this community, and I'm so grateful to all of you that have subscribed to my channel this year. It is my first year on BookTube, and I'm having a blast. I love creating this community and talking books with all of you, and I've made so many amazing friends that I talk to every day, and I'm very happy to be here, and I had a phenomenal reading year. Please let me know down below, what was your top 3 favorite books of the year? Let me know, because I love to hear it, and maybe you'll recommend me a book I've never read before, and I will add it to my TBR. Please like, comment, and subscribe. If you really like my content, please hit the notification bell to be notified every time I post new videos. As always, your support means the world to me, and until next time, thank you guys.